Pokemon Alpha Sapphire, the remake of the original Sapphire, is easily one of the worst Pokemon speedruns I've ever played. And it's strange because the original Sapphire was the better game for speedrunning, but the remakes completely changed things, making Omega Ruby the preferred game to speedrun and turning Alpha Sapphire into a complete mess. So what changes made such a big difference? Well, to start, the entire game is way more cinematic, making the run that much longer. But that's easy to deal with, especially since it gives us a nice restroom break later on. One of the biggest changes introduced is the addition of a physical special split. The Gen 3 physical special split lend itself much better to Swampert and Marshtomp, who will be the best starter to use when speedrunning Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire. Moves like Mudshot now have to rely on Mudkip's special stat, but won't be the only move that does. In fact, a lot of the early moves we rely on will make use of Mudkip's special attack stat. And speaking of stats, probably the biggest change of them all is having to reset for Mudkip. Because unfortunately for us, RNG manipulations are no longer a viable option in Generation 6 Pokemon games. And because the game is much more cinematic, you'll have to sit through the entire intro again and again if you don't get good enough stats. The odds of getting a good enough Mudkip are about 42%. Which are pretty low, but so are the odds of getting past Black Belt Hideki. There exists a trainer in every Pokemon game that strikes fear into the hearts of a speedrunner, and Hideki happens to be that guy for Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. This terrifying man is located inside of Dewford Gym, which is now a requirement to take on as soon as possible, just like every single trainer in the gym. Previously, you could delay this gym until much later and skip most of the trainer fights inside of it. But now you have to face the hardest fight in the game with an unevolved Mudkip immediately after the first trainer. To beat Hideki, we have to survive 3 turns by hitting his Machop with 3 echoed voices while holding a Silk Scarf. This becomes really hard to do when he has access to Focus Energy, Low Sweep, and Karate Chop. If he happens to combine Focus Energy with either of these moves, he'll be twice as likely to land a crit, meaning that the only chance at survival is to pray for no crits or hope for his 4th move, Foresight. Because unlike most gym trainers, he'll always go for the kill if you'll die on the next hit, making him the scariest trainer in the game. As soon as we continue our journey past Dewford and into Slateport, we'll experience the beginning of the worst changes made to Alpha Sapphire, and that's the brutal nature of Team Aqua. Team Aqua has some very dangerous Pokemon for our lovely little Mudkip, who still hasn't evolved yet, even though we're already past 2 gyms. Meaning we have to face the fast yet terrifying Carvanha as a frail Mudkip. This thing hits like a truck and can flinch you at a moment's notice with its stab bite. But guess what Omega Ruby has to deal with when dealing with Team Magma? A very non-threatening Numel. A Pokemon that's 4 times weak to water, slow, and quite pathetic compared to Carvanha. But the problems don't stop there. Not at all. We won't really be seeing a problem from Rival 2, Watson, or Flannery. And while Norman is a problem for both games, I'd like to focus on what makes Alpha Sapphire that much worse. And this problem starts becoming a glaring issue once we've been given access to Surf. When gaining access to Surf, we'll be teleported back to Mauville to venture across the water. This will be where Swampert swaps to the role of an HM friend for the purposes of clearing the game, since we'll be gaining access to a better Pokemon to beat the game with. But I can't help but feel this was a bad choice when it comes to which legendary was given to each game. About as bad of a choice as not subscribing to the channel if you're enjoying the content and want more cool Pokemon speedrunning videos. Steven Stone is very involved in the story of Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire and will lead you to a legendary Pokemon that Team Aqua or Magma happen to involve themselves with. Once you've beaten the admin in a double battle, Latios will be given to Omega Ruby players, while Latias will be given to Alpha Sapphire players. Latios is a much more offensively driven Pokemon, while Latias is more defensive, which makes Alpha Sapphire that much worse. In fact, when comparing the worst Latios to the best Latias, the difference is pretty close. And to be honest, it's just not fair. They literally gave the blue Pokemon to the red game. Omega Ruby never needed this monster, because guess what Omega Ruby gets to deal with now that we've progressed? Camerupt, the 4 times weak to water evolution of Numel. They'll definitely need Latios for that, right? No, he gets access to Surf and deals with it just fine. But maybe I'm overreacting. Let's take a look at what Latias has to deal with. Mightyena, Muck, Sharpedo? It just never ends for Latias. The first of these issues start inside of Weather Institute, where we see the beginning of many Sharpedos we have to fight in Alpha Sapphire. This wouldn't be such an issue if Ice Fang didn't have a 10% chance to flinch you or freeze you simultaneously, or both at the same time. And if it wasn't enough, most of them have access to Scary Face, lowering your speed, which gives them even more of a chance to flinch you, or confuse you with Swagger, giving them more chances to kill you. Latias deserves so much better than to be devastated by this shark, and would have easily made a better addition to Omega Ruby's more manageable camels. Oh, but we're not done with Alpha Sapphire's problems just yet, because it's time for Kyogre, the next main to use for an Alpha Sapphire speedrun. By the time that we're at this section of the game, we'll have cleared every gym except one, and we'll be on our way to clear one final villain fight. This final villain fight features, as you may have guessed, a Muck, Mightyena, and a Sharpedo. But if I'm being honest, this one's not actually threatening. Not only because it doesn't have Ice Fang anymore, but because of how Mightyena's AI loves to spam Scary Face. But why would this case be different than the others? Well, the reason why it's different is thanks to a lovely guard spec we can use in order to block stat-lowering moves into a nice clean setup for our lovely Latias in Alpha Sapphire. Omega Ruby has a pretty similar fight, but who cares? There's a Camerupt at the end. It's going to die. Then without a moment's notice, both legendaries are released. Time for the 10-year-old to save the world with a Master Ball. And luckily for Omega Ruby, it can actually compete with Alpha Sapphire due to the changes made that make Groudon much more viable, unlike the original games. But as I mentioned before, Kyogre has a much bigger issue waiting for it close to 3 hours into playing the game. The final gym will be a breeze. The entire Victory Road, not a problem. Even Wally isn't too bad with their Mega Gallade. The real issue shows up during the Elite Four. Sydney and Phoebe won't be an issue, but Glacia is a whole other story for Alpha Sapphire. Because once again, you get to breeze through it in Omega Ruby by equipping the Red Orb, stopping hail and water moves from ever touching you, making the Glacia fight much faster and safer. But Alpha Sapphire doesn't have that luxury once again. For Kyogre, there are 2 options for dealing with Glacia depending on your speed. Setting up on her lead Glalie, or brute force past her disgusting Walrein, which is the big issue in this fight, because her Walrein has access to Sheer Cold, a move that KOs you instantly if it happens to hit you with its 30% accuracy. So it shouldn't hit too often, right?
Oh, wow. Interesting.
No!
So cringe.
Yeah. Told y'all. It happens. It has a 100% chance to happen. Literally, I always get sheer colded if I'm on PV pace. I told you all. At what point do I just start doing Blue Orb?
Now this wouldn't be an issue if we had the Blue Orb equipped, since Permanent Rain and the ability to stop them from setting up hail dunks on this entire fight. But the Primal Kyogre animation wastes a bit of time compared to the normal fight, and this is a speedrun. With a 70% success rate, we take the risk of even a world record pace run dying to this monstrosity. But overall, with the struggles of Latias already weighing you down, and the chance of a 30% OHKO ending your run nearly 3 hours into the game, the appeal of Alpha Sapphire is just not there for most, compared to its much more consistent relative Omega Ruby, giving speedrunners plenty of reasons to downright hate this game. But massive shoutouts to the runners willing to compete for a sick time, as their willpower to see runs all the way through to the end deserves so much respect for going the distance. Be sure to check out all the speedrunners I listed above, and if you want to see more Pokemon speedrunning content, subscribe and let me know what I should cover next.